The Fever themselves as a team are having some trouble, and it's some very high-profile trouble, but that's more about team cohesion and comfort running their offense and defense that goes beyond just individual performances. We're seeing this learning curve for Clark on a very, very big stage. We're talking about little things with her that I think perhaps with fewer eyeballs on her, she would be given a lot more space to figure out. We're getting very much into the nitty-gritty of how starting guards play in the WNBA, which I actually like. I think I've actually seen a lot of people, including myself, get better and better at even just analyzing basketball through watching her change little things about how she's played in the first 3 games of her season. But I think good is where we're starting, and I think everyone would like to see Indiana put it together a little bit more, but I think people have to be kind of happy with what they're seeing from Clark so far. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of The Late Sub. I am your host, Claire Watkins. We are recording on Monday, May 20th, and we have a lot of NWSL and WNBA and a variety of different results from around the world of sports for you. But before we dive in, I do want to shout out our annual survey is up, the Just Women's Sports annual survey. Take it and you will get 40% off of Just Women's Sports merch. We want to hear from you. It only takes 5 minutes and it provides us with valuable insights that helps us improve everything that we do. So if you're a reader, a listener, you follow us on socials, have your voice heard. The link is in bio. Like I said, you're going to get a sweet discount on merch, and we get a valuable insight from people who engage with our work. So let's dig in. All right. So first off, this week, we are going to talk about the NWSL. Do not want to neglect the NWSL as we kind of get close to the halfway mark. Not quite there yet, but we have firmly passed 1/3 of the way through. We're getting closer to the halfway point of the season. We're about to move into, I think, a pretty interesting part of the season where teams are managing probably availability having to do with international rosters, not only during the break coming up at the beginning of June, but also obviously eventually once we get to mid-July, leading to the Olympics. I was telling someone this morning, like, this is the beginning of sort of the rocket to the moon, to the end of the sports calendar. It seems crazy to say at the end of May, but here we are. So rather than, again, getting too granular on each individual result, I want to talk about how coaches are doing in the NWSL. I think at the beginning of the off season, when we were talking about NWSL off season and doing some preliminary stuff for the Late Sub, we talked about how this was an interesting year for coaches. There was a lot of coaching turnover the last couple of years, some for results, some for misconduct. We're seeing some coaches really excel, some coaches start to stumble a little bit. We've seen some coaches surprise, some coaches maybe surprise in a not so good way, or even coaches that maybe historically have done quite well in the NWSL look a little bit like they've lost their way this year. So really interesting year to talk about some tactics, talk about coaching performances. So let's get into it. Who deserves a raise? Who's in the hot seat? And what teams maybe have to start thinking about making decisions as we do, like I said, get close to the halfway point of the season. So I think the number one most exciting surprise, and this ties into results and performance, it has to be Seb Hines at Orlando. So Orlando is now on a 7-game winning streak, which ties the longest in NWSL history, which was originally set in 2014. Orlando is this beautiful match made between a coach that knows how to handle the roster in front of them and a general manager who is Haley Carter, who has year after year turned this team into a contender with the right mix of draftees, signings, veteran leadership, just a lot of really nice pieces for Orlando. Obviously, the cherry on top has to be striker Barbara Banda, who had 2 more goals this weekend. Still an incredible signing. I feel like I keep repeating myself, but it remains true. Barbara Banda, signing of the season. So Hines had to sort of take over this Orlando team in 2022 after sort of rebuild after rebuild. Orlando has always been stuck sort of in this perpetual rebuilding stage. They've had to dismiss a number of managers, again, sometimes for results, sometimes for misconduct. They have seen veteran players actually asked to leave the team. They have actually seen younger players look for opportunities elsewhere. They've had to make smart acquisitions in the NWSL market. They've had to make smart signings outside of the NWSL market. And they had to give someone like Hines both space and time to develop this group into the team that we see now at the top of the table. They've played well in stretches over Hines' tenure. I think people might remember there were points at the beginning of the season 2 years ago where they were doing quite well. They went on a nice unbeaten streak last year, became a very, very tough outing, if not necessarily a top contender. They only just missed out on the playoffs last year. But this year, they're now getting this group together, this mix of drafted talents, key signing, and longtime veterans. I think you can, like I said, shout out Banda, but someone like Emily Sams, that's a drafted player who has continued to improve year after year and is now one of the cornerstone on their defense. Someone like Summer Yates, who was a late draft pickup. You look at perhaps even going back to last year, someone like Messiah Bright, who does quite well, commands a fee to go to Angel City. They're making smart decisions with player wishes and with who they are drafting. They are signing internationally really well. Signings like Rafa, Adriana, and yes, of course, Banda. That's taken everything to another level. And I think I said this a couple weeks ago that they haven't had perfect availability. They were missing Banda for the first couple weeks of the season. They are now missing Angelina due to injury. They don't always have exactly the starting 11 that they want, but they're adapting and they're winning. And I am just so impressed with the work that Seb Hines has done. So that's my Coach of the Year frontrunner right now. Maybe don't call it necessarily a huge surprise. He is not new to the league. But the way Orlando has put everything together, I think, is only just a surprise because they haven't always succeeded in doing that in the past. So Seb Hines, Coach of the Year frontrunner for me. Haley Carter, if there was an Executive or GM of the Year award, would also be my frontrunner. Other nice surprises as we're going into nearing this halfway point. I think you have to look at Portland interim manager Rob Gale. Gale took over for Mike Norris early in the year after a difficult start. And the Thorns immediately rattle off a club record 6-game winning streak. I think I said last week, this NWSL season loves a streak. We're going to break some records next week, I think. Gale hasn't really reinvented the wheel with Portland. His squad selection actually in many ways is reminiscent of Norris's, or perhaps reminiscent of where Norris might have gotten if he had gotten a couple more weeks on the job. We're seeing Hina Sagita in the midfield. We're seeing different looks up top. We're not necessarily seeing, maybe you think a coach comes in and says, okay, we're moving on from Christine Sinclair. We haven't seen that at all, actually, and her effectiveness has gone up under Gale. He has made slight tweaks, though, that has helped, in particular, individual players play very well. Someone like Sophia Smith was starting to hit the back of the net based on prior individual good stat performances, but not necessarily getting those goals. Maybe you look at an element of, maybe Smith was still good if inefficient to start the season. But I do think that Gale has introduced specifically some pressing triggers in the defense that has generated a lot of turnovers that get Smith on the ball in more effective ways. So I think in terms of surprises, coaches that sometimes it's interesting in the NWSL, sometimes it's interim coaches that tend to be on people's shortlists at the end of the year rather than someone who's been the head coach permanently. Just very impressed again with what Gale has been able to accomplish under a short timeline with Portland to turn the season around, which was exactly what he was asked to do. But while I'm high on what Gale is accomplishing, I also just want to put a little bit of a temper on it because, like I said, interim managers, actually, many of them do well in the NWSL, especially if they've been given a squad that kind of already knows what they're doing. This is actually a cycle that I think the Thorns got stuck in with Norris, where they thought he was a very capable person to take over this team. He didn't make a lot of adjustments to implement any sort of principles that maybe he wanted to play with, and then things got sort of stuck in a rut. Someone like Gale, very easy to kind of come, not very easy, but maybe easier to come in, make slight tweaks, but don't get in the way. Suddenly this very talented team is executing again. I think for sustained excellence that the Thorns want, they need to do a full coaching search. I don't think you want to get too locked into the idea that the interim is always the right person for the job, even if they did a nice job of not getting in the way. But you will eventually need a coach to get in the way. You do need coaches with a little bit more of a long-term plan, and not even just long-term like 1 season, but 2, 3, 4 seasons out. So I do think they should do a full coaching search, but Gale has done a really, really nice job with Portland so far. Portland and Orlando play each other this weekend. This is going to be a blockbuster. Clear your Friday. It's going to be incredible. We're going to see Thorns versus Orlando. Watch it be a draw, right? Someone's winning streak is ending, but I am curious if there's going to be a winner out of this one because I described it on Twitter as an unstoppable force and an immovable object, and I think a lot of that does have to come down to the coaching. Speaking of an interim manager doing possibly too well, I'm interested to see how the Washington Spirit handle their managerial turnover once Jonathan Heraldez comes over from finishing his time at Barcelona. Interim manager Adrian Gonzalez has the team looking great. like a fully rejuvenated version of themselves. They play with a coherent style. They have clear tactical ideas. They've put the correct personnel together to execute them. Now, obviously, some of these principles are Giraldez's principles. I think I talked in the past about the double number 6 midfield, the way they're setting Ashley Hatch up out wide, the way they understand space to deny opportunities for other teams and create opportunities for players like Sarr and Rodman and Bethune. But I do also wonder, though, Gonzalez is the coach that's been in the locker room this whole time. He's been the one in the day-to-day getting the team ready for Giraldez's arrival, which will happen after the Champions League final. And honestly, Barcelona is expected to win the Champions League final. I'm just very curious to see if the turnover disrupts things at all, or if they just truly have a perfect succession plan to turn things over. Because I would like to think that someone like Gonzalez, if he is interested in a permanent position as a manager in the NWSL, he has an incredible resume at this point, because I think we talk about this with the US, right? How it's difficult to have a manager coming in mid-season or mid-year, and you have limited communication with an interim who has to then turn the team around as this manager is getting ready to join them. And so, Gonzalez he'll still be part of the coaching staff. He'll still be in the locker room, but I am interested to see how that transition occurs. And if Gonzalez is interested in perhaps taking that resume elsewhere, because he's done a fabulous job with that team. Moving on, maybe out of the surprises. I think those are the big positive surprises so far. And moving more into, okay, I think we know exactly who this coach is, but it's nice to see them continue in a positive way, continue making a positive impact on their teams. I think those coaches are Vlatko Andonovski, Lauren Donaldson, Juan Carlos Amoros, and Sean Nahas. I don't think we're seeing, again, any reinvention of the wheel from these coaches, but we are seeing them continue to implement the way that they want to play in ways that are productive. And as we'll get to in a little bit, that's not always a guarantee in a long NWSL season, maybe starting with Vlatko. I think the big question for Vlatko Andonovski was always, who is the real Vlatko, right? Is it the championship-winning NWSL coach? Is it the embattled head of the U.S. Women's National Team during a period of historic futility? Is it the guy who's really good at adapting to adversity, or is it the guy who looked very rigid on the world stage? Who is this manager, and what does it look like as he returns to the NWSL? And I guess maybe the answer, as is true, I think, for a lot of just human beings, is he's both. He's so well suited for club football. I don't think that anything that we're seeing from the Current this season retroactively changes his tenure for the United States, but it does just go back to, I understand why he was hired for the United States. And the NWSL hasn't changed so radically in the years he was gone to make him struggle with getting results in this league. The Current are still undefeated. They did drop points this weekend. It was kind of unlucky. It was a shot from Savannah DeMello for Racing Louisville in the 13th minute of second half stoppage time. I think they probably felt like they could have closed that out a little bit better. But going back to Andonovski, he's got the Current now playing more of what you would consider his team style to be. He doesn't like to give up goals. You can see how he's been proud of increasing ability to stop shots. We're seeing growth from young players like Gabby Robinson. I mentioned her last week. I think she's been playing very well. We've seen immediate success from signings like Temwa Chawinga. I think Andonovski has already shown right away, and he probably had to, right? The Current gave up a lot to get him and waiting for him to be available at the beginning of this season, that he still is one of the best NWSL coaches, perhaps in league history and perhaps in league present. So it's been a nice bounce back, I think, for Andonovski, hopefully. And I also think that it has to be a nice bounce back for this roster, because I think that they had to kind of suffer through a middling season last year to get to this point. Speaking of Lauren Donaldson at Chicago, he was brought in basically to turn the Red Stars into sort of a normal, coherent team on the field, and I think he has absolutely done that. They are coming off of a loss this weekend to Gotham. Gotham, player for player, is just in a different place than Chicago is in right now. The Red Stars are probably going to keep hitting a wall against a certain level of competition this year, but you can still see the connections forming for the future. Donaldson is probably a little bit closer to the end of his coaching career than the beginning of it. I am curious sort of what their succession plan is for him eventually, though Nessa, I think with the job he's doing, he can have it for as long as he wants it, but they're figuring out not only sort of how they want to play as a team, but what this team looks like for the next couple years. Penelope Hawking has scored in 3 straight games. They are now finally working in rookies like Leilani Nesbitt and Jamisa Joseph. They look like they have been given the fundamentals to be able to play in this league for a long time. The defense has been a little bit personnel proof in a nice way. They've had to do some rotating due to injury. They play the same way pretty much every week. The defense is going to be sturdy. The midfield has some gaps. They need to find their offense, but once they do find attackers, they can switch on a dime and move the ball very quickly. It's fantastic what Donaldson has gotten Chicago to at this point. Like I said, I don't know exactly what their ceiling is this year. Again, probably depends on how far Mallory Swanson takes them. But if you're doing a check-in on how Lauren Donaldson is doing at Chicago, I think he is doing exactly what he was brought in to do. And I think they have to be very, very happy with that as they turn into a team that can compete in the transfer market in this next offseason. And then to Juan Carlos Amoros and Sean Nahas, 2 good coaches that can guide their teams through adversity. Again, Gotham looking increasingly like killers again. They get a good win against Chicago over the weekend, very tidy. Lynn Williams is now the all-time leading scorer in NWSL history in all competitions. Shout out to Lynn Williams. She breaks Sam Kerr's record. And JCA's style really works when it works. They take a high line of contention. They pepper you. They put you on your heels and don't let you play your game. And when they have the personnel available, and even actually sort of despite, like I said, we're seeing emerging talents like Ellis Stevens, who got the game winner this weekend. They're able to impose their style of play. And I think that Gotham, again, I don't know if Gotham is a Shield contender. I'm going to be completely honest. I don't think that is perhaps their trajectory this year, but I think if they get into the playoffs, just like last year, I think they're going to be very, very tough to beat. And speaking of tough to beat, Nahas and North Carolina, I was saying this kind of as a negative last week, this idea that they're doing everything but scoring. But then maybe this weekend you see the positives of that. When they do get back in the win column, they get a win over Utah. This was a comprehensive performance. They are sweeping the ball out of the back. They are possessing through the midfield. They are moving things out wide. They move the ball quickly and purposefully. And they spent, I don't know the exact stats, but I can certainly say it felt like at least 75% of that game in Utah's defensive third. Scoring is an issue. They were only able to win this game 1-0, and it took many, many chances to get there. I think, as we've discussed, that's more of a personnel issue necessarily than the way the team is playing. I think that if you look at a team like North Carolina and you look at sort of their results over the last month, you say, oh no, is something going wrong with the coaching? And I think firmly the answer is no. I think they just, again, need to either do some finishing practice or be aggressive in the transfer market once they reach August. So I feel good about those coaches. I feel good about that sort of middle of these coaches that we know well, and that we're seeing the underlying positive things about the way that they like to coach rather than kind of living or dying by every result every week. But that kind of leads us to this next group of coaches that we know very well, I think, but the results are not always there. And it's kind of bleeding into the way that they're playing. Some of these coaches, their tendencies, the ways their team plays are almost to a fault this season. And you have to wonder if, despite some of the pedigree here, some of the seats are getting a little bit warmer due to ongoing expectations of success. I think we're talking about coaches like Casey Stoney, coaches like Laura Harvey, maybe a coach like Becky Tweed, who, like I said, did sort of that tricky thing of a very, very good period as an interim manager, has a whole offseason now as primary manager, as head coach, and we're still not quite seeing the results from Angel City. I'll start with Becky Tweed because I'll be honest, I'm not entirely sure why Angel City isn't performing better than they are right now. I think we're seeing a lot of actual kind of working positives for Angel City. Their young players are working their way into the season. I think you can look at the Thompson sisters as a good example of that. They were getting perhaps like an all-star performance from Sarah Gordon. She did have to leave this week's match due to an injury. I think maybe even you could say, okay, that result gets lost because that's a huge player to lose. Their veterans are playing well. You know, I just am not quite sure. Maybe it's positional. I think maybe, again, you could go back to roster construction. I am not quite as hard on Becky Tweed maybe as I am the two other coaches in this group, but I still just think it's difficult. I think it's difficult to go from an interim manager who exceeds expectations to a primary head coach who then has to guide a team through an entire season, which leads us to perhaps someone like Casey Stoney. Casey Stoney won San Diego a Shield in just their second year last year. She just signed a huge extension to ward off Chelsea. And yet, this season really is not going to plan. They have a lot of injuries that they've been dealing with. I don't want to discount that, and I think that also buys a coach some time. but their style of play doesn't set them up well to do better despite injuries. They don't play a particularly attacking style of football. Makes it difficult to grind out results on a deficit, right? If you yourself are not necessarily have a systemic plan of how you're going to score goals other than we're going to be direct and our attackers are all really good, maybe you don't have those really good attackers available. What do? You go down in a game and it gets harder and harder to come back. I think that Casey Stoney should get a long runway. I think that everything else that she does is excellent, and I think that they will have some players to fall back on later this season, but I am a little bit surprised maybe with how much immediate success Stoney and San Diego have found that they haven't yet addressed some of the roster and tactical issues that would make it easier for them to control tempo, which is actually something that they've talked about wanting to do. They talked about it last year. Turned out they didn't really need it that much. Talked about it this year. Turns out they need it more. At what point do you start deepening your ability to control things through a possessive midfield? Not every team needs this, but it does give you a ceiling on how you can perform when you don't have all of your best players available. I think we're seeing that with San Diego. And even to perhaps a more extreme version, Laura Harvey's Reign. Good fight from the Reign this week, actually. They came back to tie the game from down 2-0, and then fall 3-2 to Orlando, which, I mean, we've said Orlando's very good. There's no shame in falling to Orlando. But this is just not the season that Seattle wanted after making it to the NWSL championship last year. They lost some key free agents, for sure. They've got some injuries that are giving them trouble, for sure. But I guess maybe my question for someone like Laura Harvey is, someone like Harvey is such a good quality control manager. High floor, always. She knows how she wants her team to play. She is pretty consistent in only really giving minutes to the players she thinks can handle the team's style of play. And that means that the Reign always pretty much have sort of this steady through line of specific performances throughout a regular season, which usually sets them up well to at least make a postseason. They're like a very, very good regular season team. They're not getting the results this year so much. They've been, eating a lot of losses. And the approach has not changed. So you could maybe call Seattle a team in the rebuild, but you look at the team that they started against Orlando this weekend. They start Ji So-yeon, Jess Fishlock, Anhad James Turner, Lauren Barnes, Sofia Huerta. These are all players over the age of 30. These are older players who are supposed to be that quality control for a style like Laura Harvey likes to play. Again, we always talk about possessive. Are they creating chances? Are they finishing those chances? People could say this goes back to last year and they were papered over a little bit by overperforming in the playoffs. I think you could look at a lot of reasons how this happens. They lose a huge locker room leader like Megan Rapinoe. They lose key free agents. But again, Seattle has never been particularly good at coming back from a deficit down. But what we're seeing increasingly is they also do not have the ability to pull ahead and then defend. And we're not really seeing a full rebuild, we're going to try to get young players looks to try to work this out. We are seeing just sort of continued runouts from players that I know Harvey trusts very much. I don't necessarily think that's bad. I do think that there's time to work things out with those players that you trust. But they are running out of time maybe to make a deep run to try to make it to the playoffs this year. So very curious how people are feeling in Seattle. I think obviously Harvey is so well respected. Another coach that just got an extension, just took the team to the championship last year. But what does this look like? What does the next era of the Seattle Reign look like under Laura Harvey? I also know that this team is waiting for a sale to be finalized. I know that can really affect sort of the day-to-day. We've seen that in Chicago. We saw it in Portland. That can make a big difference as well. But yeah, I think it is warranted, not necessarily to ask if Laura Harvey's seat is all that hot, because I doubt it, but what are the changes? What does the new era of this team look like? And how willing is the staff to make those changes? So just fascinated to see kind of how this goes for the Reign in the next couple of weeks. The rest, I think, is probably too early to tell. Fran Alonso, Bev Yanez, Amy Rodriguez, Albertine Montoya. We actually saw some nice stuff from the Bay this weekend, I gotta say. They have dealt with their own adversity, and they also have dealt kind of with sort of this expansion-y roster that has some holes. They moved Kiki Pickett to more of a defensive midfielder role, and she completely changes the game for Bay. So I'm already liking some of the adjustments I'm seeing from Montoya, and I think they have a renewed focus on getting the defense working a little bit better. They obviously still have this high-powered attack, kind of like what I'm seeing from Montoya. But yes, going to Alonso, Yanez, Amy Rodriguez. Some of these franchises, whether it's the expansion sides or some of these teams and markets that are still trying to figure out their identity, I think these issues probably go beyond just a coach, which makes me less enthusiastic to say, oh, these seats should be hot, these coaches should be dismissed. It's not always better to introduce further uncertainty to seasons that are already having some trouble. I think probably all of these coaches deserve maybe a full season, but I think that maybe that's the next thing for these clubs to look at. If you aren't sure if the issue is the coach, then what else has gone wrong? And again, I want to give grace to the expansion teams. Not always easy to put together the roster that you want right away. But I think you're also, again, just looking for changes. You're looking for fight. You're looking for adjustments. Someone like Alonso is continuing to adjust, but not always raising the efficiency of the overall style. Bev Yanez, actually, her Louisville team is so good, sort of that rising to the competition level. But that unfortunately also sometimes means that they lower to competition level and they really struggle to say, this is the style of racing Louisville soccer we want to play. And then Utah, I think, again, they have some roster gaps, but they've also got some confusion, I think, about how it is they want to play, and they just got peppered by North Carolina. So I think they need more time, definitely need more time, but I think all of these are valid question marks as well. So I think overall, exciting. I think it's nice to see different styles. I think it's nice to see some coaches come in and succeed. Interesting always to see some long-standing coaches maybe get stuck in a rut. But I think these are the things that teams fall back on as seasons get long. We talk about individual players all the time, and they're very important. But if you don't have a coach that's making any sense, it's hard to stick it out. But a quick note to close on soccer, which is a little bit of a downer. The U.S. Women's National Team is having a growing injury problem again. We're moving into this week where we might start hearing some rumblings about what Emma Hayes' first U.S. Women's National Team roster is going to look like for June friendlies. Alyssa Nair sat this weekend out for Chicago. Jaden Shaw did not play. Alex Morgan did not play. Tierna Davidson did not play. Katarina Macario left Chelsea's game on the weekend with a thigh issue. And Naomi Girma and Abby Dahlkemper played limited minutes, which is a positive, but Girma is someone who I think has been managing a thigh issue all season. We're looking at a similar conundrum maybe for the U.S. that we saw last year, and perhaps this is just part of modern football. This will always be an issue, is I think we can put together our pie in the sky best 18 to put together for an Olympic roster, but I think we are going to see some players have some trouble keeping healthy, so one to watch as well. Okay, switching over to WNBA. We have a full week of WNBA games to discuss. It's been fun, to be honest. Lots of teams figuring things out. Some close games, some illuminating blowouts, some big individual performances. I've really enjoyed the first week of WNBA action, and I think this is going to be a very exciting season. I think we're going to start just with some individual performances. I think as the season goes on, we'll have the opportunity to do some deeper dives into how individual teams are playing and how things are working, but beginning of the season is all sort of about just sort of who's making plays, who looks ready to go right away. So let's just get right into it. Let's talk MVP. It's like week one, and I'm like, we're talking MVP, but we should talk about the three players that dominated the MVP race last year, how they're doing this year, and who else might be part of that conversation, because it's a fast season, but it's a long one. So I think you got to start right away. Alyssa Thomas already has a triple-double in her first game, had a double-double in her second game. I think Alyssa Thomas is going to better herself this year even than last year. I think we should be looking for consistent triple-doubles, perhaps weekly, from Alyssa Thomas. We saw A'ja Wilson open the season with 30 points and 13 rebounds. She followed it up with a performance of 22 and 10. A'ja Wilson is increasingly not even the focal point of that Aces offense, but she is, I think, at this point going to be the emotional leader as well. So I think when you talk about sort of all of the elements of MVP, really liking what I'm seeing from A'ja Wilson. Breanna Stewart upped the ante. I think I said she's had kind of a quiet start, or at least did in their first game against Washington. They have 2 games in a row against Indiana. Stewart starts that game. The second game against Indiana, she gets 31 and 10. She follows up with 24 points in their third game. Stewie's heating up. That was a series that I think the Liberty really wanted to see some things working for them, and I kind of blew the floodgates open. I think they're happy about that. So yeah, with the big three from last year, kind of looking like the big three from this year. You got Thomas, Wilson, and Stewart. But let's open it up beyond the big three. Here are some other performances that I really liked, and I think there are some dark horse candidates that might put some very compelling portfolios together this season to argue for MVP. I think we have to look at Napheesa Collier. I mentioned her last week. Like I said, she's the North Star for this Minnesota team that has already been doing quite well. In their second game, she scores 29 and has 9 rebounds and 5 assists as Minnesota goes unbeaten to start their season. Really impressive from Napheesa Collier. Kalia Copper scored a career-high 38 points in Phoenix's win over Atlanta. It's only Copper's second game with the Mercury. She's already hitting career highs. Very exciting to see from her. If anyone would actually pull focus from Alyssa Thomas in Connecticut, it would be teammate Dewana Bonner, who scored 22 and 6. The Sun look like they haven't missed a beat. Again, you go to this philosophy of, is the MVP the best player on the best team? If that does turn out to be the Sun, I think they have a couple compelling candidates for that argument. Last year's leading scorer, Jewel Lloyd, also one to watch. She keeps putting up big score lines, even as the Storm figure out new personnel. The Storm have yet to really put together their first truly convincing performance. They also did not have Nneka Ogwumike available as much as they would like this week. They still, they are still a team putting it all together, but Lloyd is consistent. And then the other very consistent player on a team still putting it all together is Arika Ogunbowale. 25 in a win, 35 in a loss this week. Still so good at what she does, and is still just such a clutch player in the fourth quarter. Just, I think, always in that conversation of top scorers, top players. So that's kind of the early returns for MVP. I think that there's going to be some things that emerge, but I think you can kind of look at, sometimes it is a little bit obvious. Sometimes it is the players who did well last year who we're going to see kind of still take that jump this year. But speaking of jumps, maybe some really early most improved player talk. Some players that have surprised in week one based off of their performances last year. I think Dejanay Carrington is a really good example, the guard for Connecticut. She had her big moment when she was guarding Caitlin Clark in their season opener, and she did so well. She's really executing at both ends of the floor. She follows that up with another great performance as Connecticut, again, goes undefeated to start. Big step forward from Carrington. Really liking what we're seeing from her. Just sort of an all-around guard. I think, again, I have said I think that Betnijah Laney Hamilton is maybe the standard for that sort of all-around guard play. She plays for New York. I think Carrington could become that exact type of player. I think Alana Smith for Minnesota. To be honest, I think her most improved campaign really was last year when she made a big splash for Chicago, but no denying that she's continuing to build into something very special. And then speaking of Chicago, I want to keep an eye on Diamond DeShields. Very talented player. She was kind of Chicago's number one for a while. She's been dealing with injuries in recent years. She left the team. Now she's come back. She's going to be a much bigger part of their offense than she was during their championship winning year in 2021. Very steady in Chicago's first win. Would love to see her put an MIP level season together. I think Diamond DeShields is a player to watch. But now let's pivot over to what everyone was talking about this week and probably will be talking about for the rest of the season, which is rookies. We're going to talk about rookies, the Rookie of the Year race, which I think is one that people are very interested in this year. Going to start with the obvious. Caitlin Clark has been good. I think it's hard to tell what a good performance and maybe a poor team performance looks like, or what the expectations should be for a rookie in their first week as a professional. Caitlin Clark has genuinely been good. 2 20-plus point performances in 3 games against 2 very good teams. You could see her rebounds and assist levels begin to improve in the Fever's second game against New York. The turnovers are slowly going down, even from half to half. She might have quite a few turnovers in the first half. She stops making those turnovers in the second half. Frankly, no other rookie in this first week is scoring at Clark's rate. You know, impact for a rookie is not always just about scoring, but I do want to keep analysis and expectations for Clark sort of in reality, in the sense that she is both getting more reps and hitting more shots in week one than any other rookie, which is, I think, what Indiana want and what people expect from a player like Clark. The Fever themselves as a team are having some trouble, and it's some very high-profile trouble, but that's more about team cohesion and comfort running their offense and defense that goes beyond just individual performances. We're seeing this learning curve for Clark on a very big stage. We're talking about little things with her that I think perhaps with fewer eyeballs on her, she would be given a lot more space to figure out. We're getting very much into the nitty-gritty of how starting guards play in the WNBA, which I actually like. I think I've actually seen a lot of people, including myself, get better and better at even just analyzing basketball through watching her change little things about how she's played in the first 3 games of her season. But I think good is where we're starting, and I think everyone would like to see Indiana put it together a little bit more, but I think people have to be kind of happy with what they're seeing from Clark so far. Other rookies have also, though, had a nice impact. I think we have a number of teams that are relying on their rookies more, so they're getting more minutes and having more opportunities to make a difference. Clark is a good example of that. I think another good example is Angel Reese in Chicago. She is doing exactly what she was brought into Chicago to do: score and rebound. She came close to her first pro double-double in the team's second game against Dallas. She's doing a nice job of pacing herself to turn it on in the fourth quarter. She's had 2 very good fourth quarter performances in Chicago's 2 games, which I think is a testament certainly to strength and conditioning and just being ready to turn it on when they need her. You don't always see that from rookies. She didn't seem to get tired. I think that was really impressive from Reese. She's gotten into foul trouble at times, which I think is pretty normal. That's actually an ongoing refrain for a lot of the big rookies this year so far. But yeah, I think Reese, the nice thing for Reese is that she's not alone. She's not on an island. She's usually out there with another big. They have nice veteran presence in Chicago, even if it is a little bit more underrated. And I think she's going to continue to get cleaner, but she's already executing the stuff that we all knew would translate immediately to the pro game, which are rebounds, and she gets some nice buckets as well. Cameron Brink, kind of a similar vibe, couple really nice blocks against the Aces this weekend. She's not scoring quite as much, but she's still building off of those fundamentals that immediately translate. As perhaps expected, just like Reese, a little bit of foul trouble, but I don't think anyone is super surprised by that. She was a player that usually ran up to the foul limit in college. I think she would like to continue to build off of the ability to be a little bit cleaner on her defense, but also sometimes getting physical is getting physical, and I think she doesn't probably mind giving up a couple of fouls if she is imposing herself in the paint. Aaliyah Edwards got her first start on Sunday for Washington. I like the way Aaliyah Edwards plays so well. She's going to be such a solid pro. I just do think that UConn produces such solid professionals. And if she's given the ability to continue to grow into minutes and grow into her efficiency, she's probably not going to light up the box score maybe until later this season, or maybe possibly not at all in her rookie season. But I already like how much her teammates clearly rely on her to execute when managing loads for other players, because Washington has had some early injuries that they've had to manage. And then I also this is just kind of for fun, we saw flashes from the Aces rookies this weekend. Martin and Fair. They've dropped into such a good situation. It was so fun to see Kate Martin get that block. It was nice to see De'Asha Fair get some buckets. I think they're both going to flourish this season coming off the bench. I like the vibes in Las Vegas a lot. I think that they were very smart to not give up on the draft, and they picked two fantastic personalities with good fundamentals to add to that mix in the locker room that is going to feel revitalizing for them. I think that Vegas has to be so happy with their first week in terms of getting some of those players some minutes. Overall teams, we're going to just run really quickly kind of on who looks good, who looks like they have more to do. This isn't really going to change much from even off-season evaluations. Connecticut, New York, Las Vegas, not shocking. They look all very good. New York turned it up in the home and away against Indiana. Stewie looked like she was getting going for real. These, in my opinions, are the championship frontrunners, same as last year. Connecticut, New York, Las Vegas. Phoenix, Minnesota, Seattle. Phoenix and Minnesota in particular have to be thrilled with how things are going so far. The Mercury played the Aces tough on night one and then took it down to the wire against Atlanta. Again, they get that huge performance from Clea Copper, who is brand new to the team. They're still without Brittany Griner. I think they have to feel really good. They must feel like they are able to execute the way that they want to play. Minnesota also just looks like such a tough out. They had to grind that thing. They went into overtime against Seattle in their second game. Just sort of an ugly basketball game, but they're just so tough to beat. So tough to beat already. I think Minnesota's, again, Cheryl Reeve has to be so excited with what she's been able to get out of her group so far. I don't know what their ceiling is, but they're going to be a tough outing, and I think they're going to be a playoff team. Seattle, I still want to see more from. But they're going to have a talent advantage on most nights, and the more that they kind of work in this mix of this new starting five, I think they're going to gel. But we've yet to see Seattle's big breakout performance, which I think maybe they have to also feel good about because it has not been bad. The team's still waiting for the big jump. This is actually kind of similar to last year. Atlanta and Dallas. I like both of these teams. I love their bigs. I'm such a big Tierra McCowan fan for Dallas. I love the way that she plays. Big fan of Cheyenne Parker Titus for Atlanta. But it's still just kind of waiting for them to feel like they have control over results when they are playing these other very good teams. But not bad starts for both. But I do think Dallas and Atlanta are maybe one of the highest variance teams where they could finish, depending on how things go, maybe as high as fourth, but also maybe as low as seventh or eighth. I find both these teams very, very interesting in that way. And then you get into this tier of sort of the young and hungry teams that feel like the most linear connection from the college season, right? Because we're seeing a lot of rookie time. LA, Washington, Chicago, Indiana. Pieces aren't entirely holding together as they work in these extended minutes for rookies. The Sky are the only team so far of these four to grab a win so far. Really liked that win. It was a comeback win against Dallas. First win under Teresa Weatherspoon. Liked it. I think Washington, however, has had some pretty promising losses. I really like their energy. And LA, again, isn't necessarily competing player for player, but they're not figuring out just one-star rookie. They're figuring out two. And I particularly liked what I saw from Rakia Jackson in their second game against Las Vegas. She was high efficiency off of the bench. So hopefully she'll start working her way into the starting lineup sooner rather than later because I think she's very, very talented. And then final maybe WNBA thought. Let's take a second on Indiana because I think that's worth it. A lot of hyperbole around this team, as we know. They're getting these big primetime TV slots, and they're losing big. What to think about Indiana? Like I said, it's almost cool. It's exciting to see so much analysis about a team that I think was just written off and overlooked for a number of different years. Now, do you question, okay, maybe why were they written off and overlooked? What are some of the issues with Indiana that go beyond a couple of number 1 draft picks, right? And I do think the frustration with the team is less having to do with an expectation that they should win all their games, certainly not against Connecticut or New York, but sometimes their lack of organization and the way that you're seeing them play is, just, for lack of a better word, just kind of a bummer. But they're getting better. They're getting better. I think they're still getting comfortable with a pick and roll, which in a way that I think surprised not only me, but I think a lot of people. I think we kind of assumed that Indiana would sort of have some of those basic actions down by day one, and they didn't. That's something that actually you see game by game by game. They continue to improve. I think you have a player like Boston, you have a player like Clark, you have a player like Alyssa Smith. You need to have a basic pick and roll down, and they're working on that. When it works well. And you're seeing it's kind of twofold. You're seeing Boston get more comfortable with the motion, and you're seeing Clark get more comfortable with the entry pass. And that's how you get high turnovers in game 1, and that's how you start to whittle down the turnovers in game 2, game 3, is you get better at the action and you get better at the passing. It is affecting their ability to get space in the paint, which then also does affect their ability to get space outside. We are still seeing Clark sling it from time to time. She had at least one really nice logo 3 in Brooklyn over the weekend, but they need to be mixing and matching a little bit more with how they're using their length and how they're using their bigs. And we talked about this last week about Aaliyah Boston not really getting enough touches. Sometimes it's not even just about the touches, but it's about the quality of the touches or what movement is happening around her when she does have the ball. Not enough movement in the half-court offense from Indiana meant that they tried to move very quickly, turns into isolated offense or basically just like a shot turnover. But again, started to see some slight improvement by game 3. And I would like to think that they are understanding where those spots are, and maybe they're just kind of drilling stuff like the pick and roll over and over and over again to see if that improves. Because I'm not to say that Christy Sides can't get the Fever more organized. Head coach Christy Sides in her second year. But I will say that she's probably only got so long to make it happen. Things will get easier as they play more mid-tier competition. They're playing title contenders right now. And this learning curve actually, for a gamer like Clark, has probably been very useful to her. But you have to make sure that doubt doesn't creep in for the rest of the roster, that they stop looking for each other in moments when people are open, a lack of productive touches getting in the way of a player's confidence, like Aaliyah Boston. And you have to be able to help them execute simple principles. Some of it's on the players, but some of it's also on the coach. The season is long, but it's fast. An expectation for improvement, I don't think are too high for them to reach. Not that they're supposed to be winning every game, but they need the offense to start looking a little bit more coherent for, I think, fans to have something to get excited about. I think it can happen, but I do think it needs to happen fast. Quickly, also, I just want to touch on one quick off-the-court thing for the WNBA, which I just thought was interesting, was this deal from the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority, which announced a first-of-its-kind sponsorship for the Las Vegas Aces, supporting all 12 players for $100,000 each in exchange for representing the city in 2024 and 2025. I always find the conversation about sponsorships in the WNBA to be interesting because they seem to be more restricted than they are in the NWSL. There seems to be cap evasion issues that Las Vegas has come up against this before. This idea that if you are securing outside deals for players, you're circumventing the cap. In the NWSL, it's been kind of known that, of course you do that. Of course you do that to make sure that players are getting more in-kind value from signing in certain markets. I think that's just sort of understood. It's a lot more tightly wound in the WNBA. There were multiple reports that were confirmed by the league that they are actually investigating this sponsorship, which is more of like an NIL style sponsorship where the players probably don't have to do a ton to receive this money, maybe a couple videos, a couple promotional appearances. This goes back to sort of that idea of charters, that idea of growth in the dub. What does that look like? Is the WNBA getting in its own way? I think a lot of times when these deals get done, you have other owners going, hey, wait, why wasn't this made available to us? We're very clear, the LVCVA was very clear that they did not do this through the Aces, which would have been a CBA violation. And I think that the messaging out of Las Vegas, the city, not necessarily the organization, is just, if you want to make these deals happen, you have to get creative. And Las Vegas wants to support the players that they have and make it an advantageous places for free agents to sign. I don't have a problem with it, I don't think. But I am, again, just very curious about these parity concerns in the WNBA that you don't always see elsewhere. You can't really see elsewhere. The NWSL in a global market does not have the ability to sort of control outside salary or outside compensation the same way that the WNBA can when it comes to competitive control globally. So yeah, just sort of fascinating from a soccer perspective to see that be an issue, though I do obviously understand why maybe the context asks for an investigation, but I would think that this would be legal. And I'm very interested to see if other WNBA markets will be pursuing something similar. And then real quick hits. A lot happened this weekend. Let's go to England. Chelsea has won the WSL. Emma Hayes rides off into the sunset with a five straight WSL title winner at Chelsea. They make a glorious comeback. They tie Manchester City on points and they win on goal differential. Literally 2 days later, Hayes was doing video promo for the U.S. Women's National Team. We are moving on. The goodbyes have been said. She's probably on a plane right now getting ready for her U.S. Women's National Team era. Very excited to see where that goes. In the world of hockey, Boston has taken a 1-0 series lead over Minnesota in the PHL finals after both teams upset higher seeds in the semifinal round. Minnesota did a reverse sweep after being down 2-0 to top seed Toronto. These teams are fun. It's gritty. We're seeing some U.S. Olympic legends fighting for the first ever Walter Cup. Tune into that this week. It will be decided probably pretty quickly. It's a best of 5, so it's going to go by fast. In volleyball, the Omaha Supernovas win Pro Volleyball Federation's first ever championship. They will split a $1 million check amongst themselves as champions. Congratulations to Omaha. In Olympic gymnastics, well, Simone Biles certainly looks Olympic ready. She wins the Core Hydration Classic this weekend with big floor and vault scores. Shalise Jones also looks poised to make her first Olympic squad for the U.S., and we still have a number of 2020 medalists in the mix. And then finally with golf, Nelly Korda has won 6 LPGA events in 7 starts, the most in one season since 2013. Ridiculous streak. She did not quite break the record. She did not get 6 and 6, but she's got 6 and 7, and her dominance this season cannot be understated. So congratulations to Nelly Korda as well. And that has been this week's edition of The Late Sub. Thanks everybody for hanging out. Make sure to do our survey. Get a sweet discount. We want to hear from you. Shout out to producer extraordinaire Parker Fenton. I have been your host, Claire Watkins, and we will see you next week.